We all have that nagging feeling sometimes, that itch at the back of our minds that tells us something isn't quite right. It's that sense of unease in a room, that feeling of disconnect when someone is telling a story that just doesn't add up, the ability to see the unspoken truth behind the carefully constructed facades that people present to the world. But what if that feeling wasn't just a fleeting intuition, but a constant, overwhelming awareness? What if you could see through the social masks, sense the hidden emotions, and perceive the unconscious patterns that escape everyone else all the time? Is there a dark side to seeing what others don't? And if so, how do you navigate it? Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, dedicated a significant portion of his life to understanding the human psyche, exploring the depths of the conscious and unconscious mind. His work delved into archetypes, dreams, and the process of individuation, the journey towards psychological wholeness. But within his vast body of work lies a particularly fascinating and potentially unsettling discovery, the existence of individuals with what he termed differentiated perception. These are people who possess an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious content in others, a heightened awareness that allows them to see through the surface level of social interactions and into the hidden depths of the human psyche. This ability, while seemingly a gift, comes with a unique set of challenges and potential dangers. Jung's exploration of differentiated perception began with his clinical practice, where he encountered patients who exhibited this heightened awareness. These individuals weren't simply insightful or observant. They possess an almost uncanny ability to sense the unspoken, to perceive the underlying motivations and emotions that drove human behavior. They could walk into a room and instantly discern the power dynamics, the hidden tensions, and the unspoken desires of those present. They could see through lies, detect insincerity, and sense the emotional undercurrents that flowed beneath the surface of everyday interactions. This level of awareness, however, came at a price. These differentiated perceivers, as Jung called them, often found themselves isolated, exhausted, and struggling to maintain normal relationships. They were overwhelmed by the constant influx of information, unable to filter out the noise and focus on the task at hand. They saw too much, felt too deeply, and knew too much, and this excessive awareness made it difficult for them to navigate the social world. People felt exposed and uncomfortable around them, sensing that their facades were being penetrated and their hidden motivations revealed. Small talk became unbearable, friendships strained, and professional relationships challenging, as their presence disrupted the collective unconscious agreements that keep social groups functioning smoothly. One particular case that illuminated Jung's understanding of differentiated perception involved a patient he described as a highly introverted, intuitive type. This individual possessed an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others, an ability that Jung initially found both fascinating and perplexing. She could walk into a room and immediately sense the psychological atmosphere, identifying who was lying, who was in emotional pain, and who harbored secret resentments. Her observations were remarkably accurate, verified through careful questioning and observation. However, this ability caused her considerable distress rather than advantage. She struggled to engage in small talk, seeing through the superficiality of social interactions and finding it difficult to connect with people on a meaningful level. She found it challenging to maintain friendships, as people felt exposed and uncomfortable around her, sensing that she could see their hidden flaws and insecurities. She also struggled to hold employment, as her presence disrupted the collective unconscious agreements that kept groups functioning. Jung realized that he wasn't simply treating a psychological pathology. He was observing what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious, when perception becomes too differentiated for social survival. Jung delved deeper into this phenomenon, exploring the concept of participation mystique, a psychological state where individuals with highly differentiated intuition become overwhelmed by unconscious contents from others. He wrote about those among us whose psychic apparatus is so finely tuned that they absorb not merely conscious communications, but the entire unconscious atmosphere of their environment. This ability to absorb and process unconscious information can be both a blessing and a curse, leading to profound insights and understanding, but also to emotional overwhelm and psychological distress. Modern research by Dr. Elaine Aron on highly sensitive persons validates Jung's early observations, suggesting that a significant portion of the population possesses heightened sensory and emotional sensitivity. Within his psychological typology, Jung identified the introverted intuitive type, a rare group comprising approximately 1% of the population, who not only feel deeply but also perceive unconscious patterns with startling clarity. These individuals possess what Jung called a differentiated intuitive function, their brains processing not just obvious social cues but also unconscious emotional states, repressed content, and psychological patterns that others cannot detect. They see the depression behind forced smiles, sense the desperation beneath confident presentations, and feel the collective shadow that groups unconsciously agree to ignore. This heightened awareness can be both a gift and a burden, providing them with unique insights into the human condition, but also exposing them to the pain and suffering that others often try to avoid. The danger, Jung believed, lies not in the perception itself, but in the psychic isolation it creates. When one sees clearly what others cannot or will not see, one becomes a mirror that society cannot bear to look into. This creates what Jung called the problem of the superior function, where your greatest strength becomes your greatest burden, separating you from collective unconscious participation. People with highly differentiated perceptions see others' unconscious contents clearly, making them targets for shadow projection, where people unconsciously attack them for reflecting what they refuse to acknowledge in themselves. This is the same principle that dictates that nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on the environment, and especially on children, than the unlived life of the parent. When someone's shadow is reflected back through another person's clear perception, the unconscious mind has two choices: integrate the shadow or attack the mirror. Jung documented this pattern repeatedly in his clinical work, observing that the person who sees clearly often gets blamed for creating the problems they are merely observing. His patients with differentiated intuition experience this constantly, facing accusations of negativity, judgment, and creating drama when they simply pointed out obvious problems or expressed concern about troubling situations. This wasn't coincidence, but psychological defense, as people often find it easier to attack the person reflecting their shadow than to examine what's being reflected. This creates the scapegoat phenomenon, where highly perceptive individuals often become the designated problem in every group they enter, not because they cause problems, but because they reveal problems that already exist in the collective unconscious. The bearer of superior perception becomes a repository for all that the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. This pattern explains why these individuals don't just feel misunderstood, they feel systematically targeted by a force they can't rationally explain. The person who sees everything becomes a lightning rod for the discomfort and unease that others are trying to avoid. Jung observed that overwhelming perception manifested differently in different individuals, identifying 4 distinct patterns within the introverted intuitive type, each representing a different way of processing unconscious contents from others. The first type, the feeling intuitive, combines introverted intuition with differentiated feeling function. These individuals don't just see what's happening psychologically, they feel it in their own bodies, absorbing others' emotions so completely that they often can't distinguish between their own feelings and those they've unconsciously absorbed. They live in a state of perpetual emotional contagion, experiencing the unlived emotions of everyone in their environment. The world feels like an endless series of emotional echoes. The second type, the thinking intuitive, sees psychological patterns and predicts behavioral outcomes with startling accuracy. They can forecast relationship failures, career disasters, and personal breakdowns months before they occur, not through logical analysis, but through unconscious pattern recognition. They possess an uncanny ability to perceive the logical conclusions of unconscious processes that others cannot yet see. It's like having a roadmap of potential futures etched into their minds. The third type, the sensation intuitive, can sense the physical manifestations of psychological states in others, detecting illness before symptoms appear, sensing fatigue before it's acknowledged, or feeling the bodily tension that indicates emotional distress. These individuals serve as early warning systems for psychological and physical disease in their environment. Their bodies become finely tuned instruments, picking up on the subtle signals that others miss. The fourth type, the pure intuitive, is the rarest and most vulnerable. They combine introverted intuition with what Jung called undifferentiated auxiliary function, seeing everything but having difficulty organizing or expressing their perceptions coherently. They live in a state of perpetual overwhelm, receiving vast amounts of unconscious information without adequate psychological structure to process it constructively. This type is prone to anxiety, confusion, and a sense of being lost in a sea of information. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose of sensory input, Understanding your specific pattern is crucial because each type requires different approaches to what Jung called the integration challenge. Recognizing the specific ways in which your heightened perception manifests is a first step toward managing its potential downsides and harnessing its unique strengths. Without proper psychological integration, Jung believed seeing everything posed genuine dangers to both individual and collective well-being. He identified 3 specific dangers that made this discovery so threatening. The first danger is collective unconscious disruption. The individual who perceives too clearly threatens the collective agreements upon which social cohesion depends. When someone sees through the shared illusions that hold groups together, the unspoken agreements to ignore certain truths, they become a destabilizing force. Organizations, families, and societies function partly through collective unconscious agreements about what will and won't be acknowledged. The highly perceptive individual inadvertently violates these agreements simply by existing authentically. It's like shining a spotlight on the carefully constructed stage sets of social life, revealing the artifice beneath. The second danger is psychological isolation. Differentiated perception creates what Jung called the problem of superior function, where your greatest psychological strength becomes the source of your greatest suffering. The curse of consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it. The individual becomes an island of awareness in an ocean of unconsciousness. This isolation isn't just social, it's existential. These individuals often report feeling like they are living in a different reality from everyone around them, as if they are seeing the world in a different color. The third, and perhaps most profound, danger is identity dissolution. People who absorb unconscious content from others often lose contact with their own authentic personality, becoming so flooded with external psychological material that they can't distinguish between their own inner world and what they are absorbing from their environment. Jung called this participation mystique, a state where psychological boundaries dissolve and the individual becomes merged with collective unconscious contents. The danger is not merely social exile, but psychological annihilation, the complete loss of individual identity in favor of collective possession. This is why Jung considered the integration of superior perception not just therapeutically important, but psychologically urgent. Because an integrated superior perception posed such dangers, Jung developed what he called the individuation process, a systematic approach to maintaining individual identity while developing conscious relationship with unconscious contents. This process involves a series of steps designed to help individuals navigate the complexities of their inner world and integrate their unique gifts into a cohesive sense of self. The first phase of individuation is recognition and differentiation. Jung taught his highly perceptive patients to first recognize when they were absorbing psychological material that wasn't their own. He called this conscious discrimination, the ability to distinguish between authentic inner experience and unconsciously absorbed external content. The first task is to establish what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this discrimination, there can be no individual development. To achieve this, Jung instructed patients to spend time in complete solitude daily, allowing absorbed material to settle so they could recognize their own authentic psychological voice. It's like letting muddy water settle so you can see the clear water beneath. The next phase of individuation is shadow integration. Jung discovered that people who see other shadows clearly often do so because they haven't integrated their own. The more you deny your own capacity for deception, selfishness, or cruelty, the more disturbed you'll be by seeing these qualities in others. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but only if we have the courage to look inward rather than remaining focused outward. Shadow integration means acknowledging that you contain every human quality you observe in others. This doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a complete person who can see clearly without judgment. It's like acknowledging the darkness within yourself so you can appreciate the light in others. The final phase involves what Jung called conscious participation in collective unconscious, the ability to engage with others' psychological contents without being overwhelmed or losing your individual identity. The individuated person can serve as a bridge between conscious and unconscious, helping to make the unconscious conscious in others without sacrificing their own psychological integrity. This requires developing what Jung called psychological containers, the ability to hold others' unconscious contents temporarily while maintaining awareness that they are not your own. It's like becoming a skilled therapist, able to listen and empathize without taking on the patient's problems as your own. Because Jung understood the superior perception either destroys or transforms individuals, He studied historical figures to understand the difference between successful integration and psychological breakdown. He looked at the lives of individuals who possess heightened awareness and explored how they navigated the challenges and opportunities that came with it. One case that Jung considered a cautionary tale was that of Friedrich Nietzsche. Jung was deeply influenced by Nietzsche's philosophy but observed how his superior perception ultimately led to psychological collapse. He wrote about Nietzsche's ability to see through social, religious, and philosophical facades with devastating clarity, yet noted that Nietzsche never learned to integrate these insights constructively. Instead of using his perception in service of healing, he wielded it as a weapon against society. Nietzsche possessed extraordinary insight into human nature, but he remained identified with his superior function rather than integrating it into a balanced personality. Nietzsche's isolation and eventual breakdown represented what happens when superior perception remains unintegrated, where the individual becomes consumed by what they see rather than transformed by it. In contrast, Jung saw Meister Eckhart, the medieval mystic, as an example of successfully integrated superior perception. Eckhart possessed what Jung called mystical intuition, the ability to perceive spiritual and psychological realities that others could not access. But unlike Nietzsche, Eckhart channeled his insights into compassionate service, transforming his superior perception into wisdom that could nourish others without overwhelming them. He saw clearly but spoke in ways that invited understanding rather than resistance. Eckhart's success came from what he called conscious humility, the recognition that superior perception is a gift to be shared wisely, not a weapon to be wielded. Most significantly, Jung documented his own struggle with overwhelming perception during what he called his confrontation with the unconscious from 1913 to 1919, recorded in the Red Book. He wrote that he was menaced by a psychosis and was saved only by his ability to understand what was happening to him through his work with patients. His superior perception of unconscious content, both his own and others, nearly destroyed him until he learned to integrate these experiences consciously. Jung's breakthrough came when he realized that his overwhelming perceptions weren't pathological, but evolutionary, representing consciousness attempting to evolve beyond current collective limitations. This realization transformed his approach to patients with similar gifts, as individuals with superior perception often face isolation. Therefore, Jung emphasized the crucial importance of finding what he called a few who understand, others capable of engaging with differentiated consciousness without defensiveness. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but this privilege cannot be realized in isolation. It requires witnessing by those capable of recognizing authenticity. Jung identified 3 essential types of relationships for the highly perceptive individual. The first type are fellow individuated persons. The individuated person recognizes another individuated person immediately, with quality of presence and authenticity that cannot be fabricated. These connections often happen instantly and intensely, as you recognize each other as members of what Jung called a conscious minority. These relationships are rare but essential for psychological survival, allowing you to be completely authentic without fear of overwhelming or threatening them. The second type are those engaged in individuation. People actively engaged in their own individuation process, such as therapy, inner work, or spiritual practice, can often handle superior perception without defensiveness. They may not possess it themselves, but they understand its value. Those who have begun to know themselves can bear to be known by others. The third type are natural containers. Jung identified individuals who, while not possessing superior perception themselves, have what he called natural container function, the ability to hold psychological content without being overwhelmed by it. These might be mature individuals who have weathered significant life challenges. Jung developed specific indicators for identifying safe relationships, beginning with those that ask genuine questions about your observations rather than immediately defending against them. They can acknowledge their own contradictions and limitations without shame, demonstrating what Jung called psychological mindedness, an interest in inner reality. They maintain emotional stability when confronted with uncomfortable truths and show genuine curiosity about consciousness and growth. Jung also taught a careful process for revealing perceptive abilities. One should begin with small, gentle observations and notice the response pattern to feedback, assessing whether they become defensive or curious. Gradually increase depth based on their demonstrated capacity and always frame insights as offerings rather than pronouncements. The goal is not to find people who accept everything you see, but to find people who can engage with your perceptions as valuable contributions to understanding rather than threats to their self-image. Integrated superior perception serves both individual and collective development. Therefore, Jung viewed successful individuation as essential not just for personal well-being but for the evolution of human consciousness itself. He believed that individuals who successfully integrate superior perception become what he called culture carriers, people who help consciousness evolve. This transformation occurs in 4 stages. The first stage, recognition without overwhelm, occurs when you learn to acknowledge your perceptive abilities without being crushed by them. Jung called this conscious acceptance of the superior function, noting that the beginning of wisdom is a recognition of what one actually is, not what one wishes to be or fears to be. The second stage, integration without isolation, involves learning to use your perception constructively while maintaining meaningful relationships. This is social individuation, becoming authentically yourself while remaining connected to others. The individuated person does not withdraw from the world but engages with it more consciously. The third stage, service without sacrifice, happens when your perception becomes a gift you offer rather than a burden you carry. This is conscious participation, using your abilities in service of others without depleting yourself. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are and then to offer that authentic self in service of the whole. The fourth and final stage, legacy without attachment, involves what Jung called transcendent function, using your perception to contribute to collective consciousness evolution without attachment to whether others recognize or accept your contributions. The individuated person works for the future, not for personal recognition in the present. This integration becomes cultural medicine. Jung believed that individuals who successfully integrate superior perception serve a vital evolutionary function, seeing what collective consciousness is not yet ready to acknowledge, helping to prepare humanity for necessary developmental steps. What is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. Highly perceptive individuals who learn integration help make unconscious contents conscious before they manifest destructively in collective behavior. However, Jung warned about specific pitfalls that can derail this transformation, documenting the most common ways individuals derail their own transformation process. One pitfall is the inflation trap, where individuals become identified with their superior function rather than integrating it consciously. The danger is that the ego identifies with the archetype, leading to an inflation that cuts the individual off from human relationships. Highly perceptive individuals often fall into what Jung called a prophet complex, believing they must save everyone from unconsciousness. This leads to preaching, judgment, and eventual isolation. The moment one believes oneself to be the bearer of absolute truth, one has fallen into the trap of unconscious possession by the very forces one seeks to understand. Another pitfall is withdrawal, which is often justified by the individual. Jung documented cases where individuals use their superior perception to justify complete withdrawal from society, convincing themselves that others were too unconscious to be worth engaging, which Jung recognized as spiritual superiority masquerading as wisdom. True individuation requires engagement with the unconscious world, not escape from it. The hermit who withdraws from life has not transcended it, but has been defeated by it. A third pitfall is the helper's trap. Jung observed that some highly perceptive individuals become addicted to being needed, defining themselves entirely through their ability to see and help others, losing contact with their own inner development. When perception becomes identity, the person disappears behind the function. This is not individuation, but its opposite, the sacrifice of personality to role. Finally, there is a danger of the overwhelm return. Even successfully integrated individuals can regress during periods of stress, trauma, or major life transitions. They stop maintaining their psychological boundaries and become flooded with others' unconscious contents again. Integration is not a permanent achievement, but a dynamic process requiring constant conscious attention. To counteract this, Jung developed ongoing practices for maintaining healthy integration. Regular solitude helps to distinguish your own psychological contents from absorbed material. Conscious choice about when and with whom to engage perceptive abilities is also important. Ongoing shadow work prevents projection of your own unconscious contents, and connection with others capable of providing reality checking, and support is necessary to maintain proper perspective. Creative expression can also provide an outlet for overwhelming perceptual input. The integrated person does not achieve perfection, but learns to dance consciously with their own psychological complexity. Jung understood superior perception within the context of collective psychological development. Therefore, he viewed highly perceptive individuals as serving an essential evolutionary function for human consciousness. He believed that people with superior perception serve as what he called consciousness pioneers, individuals whose psychological development precedes collective readiness. Throughout history, individuals with superior perception have often appeared before collective consciousness was ready to integrate their insights, serving as advanced scouts for psychological territories that humanity would eventually need to explore. What appears in the individual first as psychological insight later manifests in the collective as cultural transformation. The individual serves as a laboratory for consciousness experiments that will eventually benefit the whole. Jung believed that in the modern era, highly perceptive individuals might be sensing psychological patterns that explain collective behavior, environmental and social unsustainability before it becomes obvious, spiritual possibilities beyond current religious frameworks, technological implications that others haven't considered, and collective shadow contents that need conscious integration. The sensitive individual feels the collective problems first and most intensely, with their personal symptoms often reflecting what the entire culture needs to address. However, this is service without martyrdom. Jung's crucial insight was that superior perception serves evolution best when it's integrated consciously rather than suffered unconsciously. The goal isn't to be a martyr to consciousness, but to be a bridge between what is and what's becoming. The individuated person serves a collective not by sacrificing their individuality, but by developing it so completely that it becomes a gift to the whole. At the highest level of development, individuals with superior perception hold their abilities lightly, seeing clearly without attachment to others, accepting what they see, and perceiving deeply without compulsion to fix everything they observe. Jung called this the transcendent function, the ability to serve consciousness evolution naturally without forcing or preaching, simply by embodying more conscious ways of being. Remember Jung's patient from 1913, the introverted intuitive who came to him during his own psychological crisis? After 3 years of working with Jung's individuation process, her life transformed completely. She learned to distinguish between her own psychological contents and what she absorbed from others. She found work as a counselor where her differentiated perception helped troubled individuals. She built relationships with people who valued her insights rather than fearing them. Most importantly, she stopped experiencing her superior perception as a curse and began understanding it as what Jung called a gift requiring conscious development. The patient learned not to see less, but to see more wisely, not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what she perceived. Her gift remained intact, but her relationship to it became integrated rather than overwhelming. This represents Jung's most dangerous discovery, that some individuals are born with consciousness that exceeds collective readiness. And this advanced perception will either destroy them through isolation and overwhelm or transform them into exactly what humanity needs for its psychological evolution. Your superior perception isn't a malfunction in your psychological makeup. It's an advanced feature of consciousness development. You're not broken because you see everything others miss. You're psychologically ahead of your time. The question isn't whether you should suppress your perception to fit in with collective unconsciousness, but whether you'll develop the individuation skills necessary to integrate your perception consciously. Jung's individuation method offers a path from dangerous isolation to conscious service, from overwhelming perception to integrated wisdom, and from psychological curse to evolutionary contribution. You were born to see everything, not to suffer in silence, but to serve consciousness evolution. The world needs your insights, but it needs them delivered with the integration, wisdom, and strategic awareness that transform dangerous perception into cultural medicine. Your gift is not your burden. Your unconscious relationship to your gift is your burden. Learn to integrate it consciously, and you become exactly what Jung believed highly perceptive individuals were meant to be, consciousness pioneers preparing humanity for psychological development that is inevitable but not yet obvious. Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't that some people see everything, but that most people who see everything never learn to use what they see wisely. The danger isn't in perception itself, but in failing to develop conscious relationship with extraordinary abilities. You are not too much for this world. You are exactly what consciousness evolution requires. Once you learn to wield your perception as consciously as Jung learned to wield his. The danger of seeing everything isn't that you see too much, but that you might never learn to see with the integration and wisdom your gifts demand. If you recognize yourself in Jung's description of the highly perceptive individual, you're part of a rare psychological type that Jung believed essential for consciousness evolution. Share in the comments which type of differentiated perceiver you are, as your individuation journey connects with others walking the same path. Subscribe for more insights into Jung's discoveries about psychological development that transcends collective unconscious limitations. And if you're ready to explore more of Jung's insights about psychological types that don't fit conventional patterns, check out my video on 7 dangerous Carl Jung psychology places that destroy your mind, where I reveal the psychological environments that are particularly toxic for highly sensitive and perceptive individuals and Jung's strategies for protecting your consciousness while engaging with an unconscious world. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.